بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. نواصل إن شاء الله تعالى حديثنا عن قصص الأنبياء. We continue إن شاء الله تعالى with the subject of stories of the prophets. والقصة لغة مأخوذة من قص الأثر، أن العرب عادة كانوا يقصون أثر الأشياء للوصول إلى غاية. Story, rather قصة in Arabic, is derived from the root word tracking down the traces of something that you are chasing until you get to a destination. And usually this is the root word of where qasas come from. And if you think about it, it applies also to the stories of the prophets, because we are tracking literally all of their footsteps throughout their lives to discern many of the lessons from their lives. ولذلك كان العبرة من القصص لقد كان في قصصهم عبرة. The essence of any story is so we can discern lessons, many benefits from stories of the prophets, but mainly so we can, because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the prophets messengers, their job is not just to deliver the message, but themselves to be a model for people to emulate as well. فلذلك فإن الأنبياء والرسل إنما أمروا بتبليغ الرسالة، لكن تبليغهم لهذه الرسالة ليست عن سبيل من باب فقط إبلاغ المعاني وإبلاغ الهدي، وإنما أن يكونوا أنفسهم قدوة. لقد كان لكم في رسول الله أسوة حسنة. You have in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam a good example to emulate, to follow. ولذلك فقصص الأنبياء تختلف عن القصة الأدبية. القصص الأدبية فيها أشياء خيالية لا صلة لها بالواقع. أما القصص القرآني والقصص الذي سطر وصح في سنة النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إنما هو حكاية عن أحداث وقعت لأناس في زمن معين، مكان معين، وأشخاص معينون. The difference between a story in literature versus the stories of the Quran, the stories in literature, they're usually from the figment of people's imagination. So they imagine things, and there's no limit as to what they can imagine and how they can fly with their imagination, because there's no restriction as to how real the story has to be. Versus the stories of the Quran has no imagination in it. All of it, in other words, it is nothing but depiction of what really happened with certain people in certain specific time, specific places, for specific purpose. And this is what makes the qasas of the Quran very real, meaning it is relatable because it did happen to people before us. And since they're human and they endured and dealt with the exact same situations as you and I are dealing with, so this, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the essence of you relating back to the stories of the Prophet so you can discern lessons from that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala يعني لما ذكر قصص الأنبياء وفي بداية سورة يوسف قال تعالى نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص بما أوحينا إليك هذا القرآن. الأصل ليس حصر الأمر في قصة يوسف عليه السلام، وإنما القصص القرآني هذا إنما هو تنوع لأحداث وقعت للأنبياء، وكل نبي له في قصته وفي قصصهم عبرة. فالعبر تتكرر بتنوع، لأن لكل نبي أحداث لم تقع لغيره. When it comes to the stories of the prophets, each and every one of them has something new to offer. And each and every one of them is unique than the other ones. So there is always something new to learn from every single story of the prophets. You don't get bored with the stories, meaning if you hear the story of Musa, as they say, if you hear one story, you've heard them all. It's not the case with the stories of the prophets. Each and every time you have a story of any of the prophets, except that it will have something new that you have not heard, you have not learned from the story of another prophet. This is why it is very important as we go inshallah ta'ala through the stories of the prophet. One of the things as a disclaimer to have, هذا من باب الحرص على أن يكون العلم يعني متأصلا، أن نتحرى في ذلك ما صح في سنة النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم، وأن نتحرى في ذلك ما جاء في كتاب الله تعالى. To stay in that frame of introducing nothing but that which is authentic in regards to the stories of the prophets. We stick to only what was related to us in the Quran, or what was authentically also related in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is very important because we have to keep in mind it's one of those things where you have to strike a balance. You wanted to tell a story, but it is not yours to tell in the first place. This is the story of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you are relating it. And even the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam لم يقص قصصا من عنده. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not really make up any of the stories on his own accord. Rather, these are all stories that Allah ta'ala taught him. So the essence of it, one of the objectives of the stories of the Quran is أنهم أثبتوا كذلك نبوة النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم، لأن قصص الغابرين في الزمان الذين تحدث عنهم النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وكأنه يراهم رأي عين دليل على صدق رسالته صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم، لأن الذي أخبره عما مضى في غابر الزمان إنما هو رب الزمان ورب المكان ورب الناس. The Prophet ﷺ was taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the vivid details about very nuanced events that took place in the deepest parts of history with so far out people away from him ﷺ, time and place. And yet he's speaking with such accuracy and such detail that as if he was there with them. How did he get to do that? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed them, the one who encompassed the knowledge of what happened in the past, what is happening now, and what will happen in the future. Allah ta'ala is the one who informed them with all of that detail, which confirms also the fact that he was truly a prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That serves also another aspect about the story of the prophets. Another aspect to keep in mind, again, just laying out all this, the disclaimers. What is known in collection of stories of the prophets, there is also an injection of what is known as إسرائيليات. فيما يتعلق بقصص القرآن دائما ما نجد بعضا من أخبار بني إسرائيل تسمى بالإسرائيليات. فما هي الإسرائيليات؟ وما يعني المسموح به في التعامل مع بالاستدلال بالإسرائيليات. How far can we use, what are the Israelites stories actually? You will find that the stories of the prophets, not only are they based on what was revealed in the Quran, and also what it was authentically related to us by the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, but some of it you will find that it is also an injection of what happened with, as far as the literature and accumulation of stories by Banu Israel. And how far can we go to use those pieces and as information from Banu Israel? This is why the scholars, subhanAllah, did not really just left that open gate without really deciphering and putting laws in place and guardrails. فلذلك أصل العلماء فيما يتعلق بالإسرائيليات ثلاثة أمور. الإسرائيليات فيها ما هو صحيح وما هو مغلوط وما هو ليس لا ندري هل هو صحيح ولا هو مغلوط. كيف التعامل مع الإسرائيليات؟ منها ما هو مقبول وهو ما وافق الكتاب والسنة، ومنها ما هو مردود وهو ما خالف الكتاب والسنة، ومنها ما لا يرد ولا يقبل وإنما يبنى الأصل فيه. Come on, sit right here for me. Yes. الأصل فيه أن لا نرده ولا نقبله، لأن الأصل فيما يتعلق بالإسرائيليات فيها ما هو صحيح وفيها ما خطأ. When it comes to using the literature of Banu Israel, and when we say Banu Israel, first of all, these are the children of Yaqub alayhi salam. Another name for Israel is Yaqub alayhi salam. So when we say the stories of Bani Israel, this is the stories of the children of Yaqub alayhi salam. And when we say the prophets of Banu Israel, these are the prophets that came to the children of Yaqub alayhi salam, starting with Yaqub alayhi salam all the way to Isa alayhi salam. That's a line of Banu Israel all the way. So whenever we make that reference of Bani Israel, that's what the reference is about. And you have their literature is accumulated either in the Torah or the Injil and the Psalms. So all of that accumulation of their resources, sometimes you will find that they are referred to as references, especially when you have some of the scholars of the Jewish community embrace Islam, and they started literally introducing some of what they had, and it is in coherence and in line with what is already established in the Quran and by the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That said, ما جاء في ما كان صحيحا من الإسرائيليات فنأخذ به. This is the rule that the scholars put forth. Example of that, you have in the Torah, in the Injil, the story of Musa alayhi salam, the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, the story of Isa alayhi salam. So you cannot reject that because it is already established in the Quran as well as in the Sunnah. There is some the stories that were introduced also by the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Example of what? Example of Jurayj al-Abid. Jurayj. لما ذكر النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم بسند صحيح قصة جريج العابد. This is this devout worshipper from the Banu Israel. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم related that authentically. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم spoke about also from the stories of Banu Israel, the story of the three men that came out and they got caught and stuck inside a cave and how they got out. The story of the three men that the Prophet ﷺ spoke about, also the many stories that he related. Those we take as is because they were authentically related to us by the Prophet ﷺ. But you also have some of them that are related not by the Prophet ﷺ, but they are actually from the literature of Banu Israel. The example of what? Those you cannot reject and you cannot say, well, this is authentically said or not, because what your basis is going back to, is it in accordance with your deen or not? If it is, then welcome. If not, you reject it. Example, Isa alayhi salam. This is from the literature of Banu Israel. Isa alayhi salam said, قال عليه السلام الدنيا قنطرة فاعبروها ولا تعمروها. This is a very simple words of wisdom from Isa alayhi salam. He says, the life of this world is nothing but a bridge. A bridge. You cross from here into the realm of the hereafter. He says, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, then cross it but don't settle on it. Don't go and build your home and houses as if you were going to be there permanently. He says the essence of any bridge, it is made to cross. You don't go and see people, sitting at picnic tables and sitting on a bridge, because it is meant for people to cross. And he says that's what the life of this world is. So he gave that analogy of a bridge. And when you look at it, this is a very beautiful wisdom, but you cannot go and prove that it is Isa alayhi salam who said it. So you cannot say yes or no to the authenticity of whether Isa alayhi salam said it or not. But the wisdom in of itself is in line with what is in our deen. This is very important for us. This might be a little bit nuanced for you all to hear, but it is important for us to have these kind of nuances as to where we extract our knowledge in this deen. This is not just something you just go and start accumulating right and left without being very careful as to what you really open your heart to, especially when you're looking at the guidance coming from the prophets, alayhim salatu wassalam. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, بلغوا عني ولو آية وحدثوا عن بني إسرائيل ولا حرج ومن كذب علي متعمدا فليتبوأ مقعده من النار. This is the rule of thumb that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam gave you and I in regards to dealing with the heritage of Banu Israel. He says sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, relay about me, meaning teach others about me, even if it is one concept of this deen. Even if it is one concept. Don't hold back. Don't be stingy. Share with others, even if it is one concept. الآية ليس القصد منها يعني آية من القرآن. الآية معنى أن تعلم الناس ولو جزءا بسيطا من أمور هذا الدين. الآية لا تتعلق فقط بالآية القرآنية، إنما هي جزء منها، ولكن كل ما يتعلق بدين الله فعلمه للناس ولو جزءا واحدا. He says صلى الله عليه وسلم, at least you can teach and share with others even if it is one small aspect about their religion. And he says صلى الله عليه وسلم, when it comes to the heritage of Bani Israel, use it, no problem. But with the guidelines that we mentioned, though you have to have those guardrails and in place when you use the heritage. Why? Because you have to understand, لأن الله سبحانه وتعالى أرسل هذا النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم خاتما للنبيين وأرسل هذا الدين وهذا الكتاب مهيمنا على الأديان. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent this prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he was the seal of all the prophets. Meaning he summarized everything that the previous prophets had come with. And the book that Allah Ta'ala blessed him with, it is a book that came to literally oversee everything that was delivered by the previous books. And, checks and balances, in other words. Who does the checks and balances? The book of Allah, Al-Quran. And it's very important. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ says, no worries, you can use the heritage of Banu Israel, but accordance to the guardrails that this book and this guidance has already set for you, no worries. Don't have to worry about that, because this book is firm. إِنَّ هَذَا الدِّينَ مَتِينٌ وَمَنْ شَادَّ هَذَا الدِّينَ غَلَبَ. He says that this religion is very firm. Don't worry about it. Anybody who wants to really mess with it is going to be wrestled down by the religion in of itself, because the firmness of the deen is within the deen in of itself. It doesn't come from outside. It is within it. It's built inside the deen in of itself. And he says, as for those who intentionally lie about me, and you say, Rasulullah said, when you 100% sure he did not say. He says, let him say that. But at the same time, he says, let him take his seat in hellfire. Na'udhu billah. فَلْيَتَبَوَّأْ مَقْعَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ. Anybody who intentionally knows that this is not from the deen, and yet he says, well, yes, it is from the deen, then what he's saying is that he is literally speaking on behalf of Allah, speaking on behalf of Rasulullah, and that is very dangerous. He said, let him take his seat in hellfire. And this is not something, subhanallah, one should mess with. One of the, and I will close with what Ibn Kathir says. قال أن التفاصيل، بعض التفاصيل التي جاءت في قصص بني إسرائيل. إنما يكون الأصل في القصة لنا في كتاب الله أو في سنة نبيه صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم، لكن قصص بني إسرائيل تزيد بعض العبر، فلا ضرر في أن نأخذ بها، لأن هذه الزيادة لا تضر ولا تنفع. هذه أولا، لو غابت لا تضر، وإن حضرت لا تنفع. طيب، ثم أنه لا عبرة بها فيما يتعلق بأخذ أحكام الحلال والحرام منها. So he's Ibn Kathir going into subhanallah, putting that in perspective. He says all of the details that usually we get, they're usually just an increase of more moral lessons. But when it comes to relying on those as basis for you to derive the rules of what is halal and haram, that's not your reference. Your reference of the halal and haram is in the book of Allah, as in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, not in those. So they've just increased more, fluff, as they say. If you wanted to add a little bit more fluff. مثال ذلك ما ذكر مما صح في قصص بني إسرائيل قصة الثلاثة الذين خرجوا بمال ليتقاسموه. One of those examples is the story of 3 men that they had a business and they all had some wealth to share, the 3 of them. And that money, فخرجوا ليتقاسموا مالهم ثم أتوا على مكان فخرج أحد الثلاثة ليأتيهم بطعام، فاتفق الاثنان، قال أو سول الشيطان لهما أن يتقاسما المال نصفين، وذلك بأن يقتلوا الثالث غيلة. These 3 partners had money to share, the 3 ways. And then they came to share it, to split the money. And then time comes to eat. One of them goes to get the food. The other 2 stayed behind. And Shaitan came to them and he says, why should you really split the money 3 ways? It's better if you split it just 2 ways. And you get half and he gets half. Why does it have to be shared 3 times? 3 ways. So they both of them decided that when he comes back, they will jump him and they will kill him. And that way they will split the money only 3 ways. ثم سول للثالث الذي خرج ليأتيهم بطعام أن يستأثر بالمال كله لنفسه. وكيف ذلك؟ قال فدس لهم سما في الطعام. And Shaitan went to the third who went to get him food and told him, why do you need to share the food, all that money with the other 2? Why don't you have the whole money to yourself? So how do you get that? So he put poison in the food. He put the poison in the food. When he goes back to get him the food, as soon as he comes in, they jumped him and they killed him. All right? And they said, well, this is perfect. Done deal. Let's enjoy our meal. They ate the food. They all croak. So all of them died. The moral story is greed kills everybody. Greed kills everyone. For as long as you allow greed to come in, sooner or later, you will be a victim. You will end up really being crippled in a way or another. Greed has no place in the heart of somebody who has Iman. Greed and Iman don't go along together. They don't go together. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, usually to get rid of greed, He gave you something even better. And He says, put others ahead of you and I'll take care of that greed. Whatever it is that you need, I'll take care of it. Greed tells you, put yourself ahead of everybody else. And that's that. And subhanallah, فلذلك قالوا على أن الإسرائيليات, this is maybe the first time you hear this terminology about Israeliyat and heritage of Banu Israel, but it's very important to know these kind of details, because sometimes you read, well, I heard this story, this and that, but it is very important for you to be able to put it in which compartment. Where does it fall? Does it fall as a resource from the Quran? Is it from the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ? Or is it from the third category? And it is very important because we are a nation, the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ is an Ummah that is intentional in what they do and what they say. And you cannot be intentional without being informed. And you cannot be informed with the wrong thing. So everything has to be really well established. فنسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يوفقنا وإياكم لما فيه خير الدنيا والآخرة، وأن يعلمنا وإياكم من أمر ديننا ما جهلنا، ويرزقنا وإياكم الأدب ما علمنا. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم، وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد والحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خير. الله يحفظكم.